All right, everybody. Thanks for listening today. My guest is Melissa Hoyer from the Wealth Conservancy in Boulder, Colorado. Melissa is a CFP, Certified Financial Planner. She is also a certified coach, which I'm interested in learning more about today. Melissa, welcome to Modern Financial Wellness. Thanks so much for taking the time.
You're welcome. And thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Likewise. So we had a chance to catch up a little bit, learn a little bit about each other. And I was really interested and excited to talk to you again and share your background and your expertise with folks. We're going to be talking about inheritance today, and this idea of coming into wealth and some of the things to look out for and think about when you're in that situation. But before we get into the details, would you mind just telling us a little bit about your background? And I think specifically about the coaching certification, maybe how that made its way into your practice and process?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started here about 20 years ago, and it's a very unique place to work because we work with individuals who have significant inheritances.
Mm-hmm.
So our focus is really on helping understand what the big picture looks like and helping people live in the world as an inheritor who is historically a group of people who are villainized. So we have a safe space where people can talk and learn and grow. And then we also help inheritors figure out their own estate planning. So it's a different process. We meet with people weekly for a very long time until we get things squared away.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of that is very much about coaching. So about 5 years into it, I decided I wanted to get better at coaching because I really loved that. Like that just was my passion in the work that I was doing. And I could see that it was making a difference. So I ended up doing a coaching program called Coactive Coaching with a group, the Coaches Training Institute in San Rafael, California. Highly recommend that training program. And I thought I just wanted to get better at coaching. And I got bit by the coaching bug. And so it was a big adventure where I ended up getting certified. And then I ended up doing a year-long leadership training program and spent some time away from the Wealth Conservancy to get enough hours to get my professional coaching designation. And then when that happened, I came back and merged the two together.
That's great. It's really interesting to me, the whole world of coaching. I've kind of done a 180 on the profession over the years.
Mm-hmm.
You know, way back when, a decade ago, I would have wondered to myself, who would hire a coach? Mm-hmm. And now I find myself as a financial planner realizing that a lot of the work that we do with clients on a day-to-day basis really comes down to what looks and feels and is a lot like coaching. So it's really cool to talk to other practitioners like yourself who have made that kind of investment and then incorporated that work into your process to help people. That's super cool. So I'm looking forward again to kind of talking to you about how that put into practice in the work that you do. Mm-hmm. You said something about the types of clients you work with, inheritors, being villainized. I just wanted to pause there. What do you mean by that they're villainized? What are they up against out there in the world?
Well, a lot of people's perception and that they have it easy, that they didn't earn it, they don't deserve it, or people just might have, an attitude with people with money. And so it feels like they have to be really guarded. Mm-hmm. And that can be very isolating for people with inherited wealth.
Yeah, it's interesting. Can you tell us a little bit more when somebody comes into wealth, they've had this inheritance and they show up at the Wealth Conservancy? What do you typically find with the clients that you meet with initially? What's going on mentally, emotionally? Obviously, they've often lost somebody that they love, which is an emotional situation to begin with, but then they have this pile of money to deal with. What are you typically finding in these folks? What kind of state are they in when they show up at your door?
Mm-hmm. You're right that they're typically going through some type of significant life transition. And so I think they're feeling, I guess I would say a lot of people who come here to work with us haven't been prepared for the inheritance. And so they're feeling overwhelmed, and it's like walking into CFP world without ever having studied for it, or estate planning without ever having studied for it. So it's just all of the acronyms and the lingo and the concepts and everything is so foreign, in addition to whatever they're experiencing from an emotional standpoint, being in this transition. So I'd say just a lot of overwhelm, confusion, and wanting to do things the right way.
Yeah. But not being prepared for it, right? Especially a lot of these things come at us suddenly. So it's obviously a huge transition when you lose somebody. But then also to be coming into wealth in that way suddenly, I'm sure can be challenging for a lot of people.
Exactly.
Yeah. You and I have talked about some of the stages of inheritance, and I thought that might be worthwhile to explore a little bit in the outset of our conversation. Can you describe the stages of inheritance and what people are going through in some of these different stages?
And this is a good time to talk about that, because when people come in, they're often in one of the first two stages of inherited wealth. And one of them is innocence. And that's the stage where you have no idea what you have or how it works. And you are feeling grateful to have this money to help you in life, but you don't really know how much you have. And maybe there's a sense of, feeling disempowered or not respected by other advisors you're working with, because you just don't know. And that person hasn't taken the time to learn about it yet.
Kind of like deer in headlights.
Deer in headlights. Yeah. And then another stage is denial. And that's a stage, just like it sounds, where people aren't relating to what's happening, and they might be ashamed, they might be scared. So they just pretend like it doesn't exist.
So they're putting things off, not dealing with things that need to be dealt with. Just don't want to go there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Then we were just talking about the transition that people have. And then there's a certain point in time when either, a loved one has died and they're inheriting, or a trust is going to have a major distribution, or even they've had the distribution and they've been in innocence or denial, but they've been getting along. But maybe they have a birth of a child and they're like, okay, I really need to figure this out. So that is the stage called an ignorant acceptance. You accept your situation and your circumstances, and you recognize that it's time to start learning.
Yeah. One thing maybe worth pointing out, all of these stages make a lot of sense, right? It's totally normal. I think even if you're not in a situation where you've lost a loved one, people can be overwhelmed and not understand their financial situation. A lot of us, I think, are in innocence to our finances, just in a normal day-to-day situation, or denial. We don't want to deal with the things we need to financially. But when somebody passes away, it just feels like that jacks up the intensity of all of it, right? It makes it much more difficult to deal with. So innocence, denial, ignorant acceptance. I need to make some change. Are there other stages, or are those the three?
Well, the next stage is learning and growing. And so when people come to us, that's the stage that we spend a lot of time in, is learning and growing. And then after learning and growing, the final stage is called integrated authority. And that's where you've learned what you learned. You know what your strengths and weaknesses are. You understand what you want to be in charge of and what you'd rather delegate with authority. And you have your systems in place, and you're allowing your wealth to nourish you and your hopes and dreams and goals. It's not getting in the way of you doing that. So that is a part that comes with education. And that's the part that also comes with coaching.
And what does that look like, and how long does that process take typically?
So it could take a while. There is a program I start out with people called Way Into Wealth, and it's a structured 8-session coaching program. where we start out by the first couple sessions really. I think of an analogy of like going into an attic where you find all these old boxes and you look in them to see what's in there. We kind of do that, except inside yourself, right? And we try to uncover the habits, beliefs, and attitudes that people have
Mm-hmm.
around money. So then that really comes to light. I have this picture of a
Iceberg. Yeah.
iceberg. Thank you. And so in coaching, we always say the tip, but in coaching these first couple of sessions, what we try to do is move this water line down a little bit and expose what's in there.
Mm-hmm.
And why that's so important is because when we have unconscious beliefs, habits, and attitudes driving us, it's really hard to become an integrated authority or make any kind of desired change.
Right.
So the idea is to recognize what are those things and just clarify it. Here are some beliefs that were handed down to me. And here are some, habits I developed around that. And some of them will be serving you well, and others people may want to transform in the process of coaching, things that just don't serve them.
It brings up an interesting point because we talk about habits, beliefs, values, these ingrained things when we're talking with clients through our financial planning process as well. It's always surprising to me how much of that lives in our subconscious and how much of that we actually inherited from our parents. So to use a hypothetical example, I'd imagine a lot of the folks that you work with are receiving money from their parents, right? So they're receiving this wealth that they have to deal with. And now they're faced with wrestling with, what else did I inherit from them?
Yes.
What else have I been carrying around? Do you find that that's an equally difficult experience for them to realize the way that I look at the world isn't maybe necessarily serving me? It just took that from my parents who are no longer here.
Yep. 100 spot on with that. Is you're like, what are you inheriting, right? There's so much that we're inheriting along with the money. So part of the process is untangling what is truly me in my heart, what's authentic to me, what are my, at this point in time, beliefs, thoughts, attitudes, and what is my mom or my dad, like what are those different voices, or my grandmother, or who know, all the people in the family. So part of it is just untangling that and choosing at that point in time, oh, I so appreciate this, ready to let that go. And here's what I want now. And some of it is like that. Thank you so much. Let's take this into the future, these thoughts. So that's what that whole first part is about. And that's not about the money. And sometimes it might be happening in conjunction with the money understanding and understanding the trusts and the accounts and the investments and things like that. But it's a totally separate thing.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm almost thinking about it's like that's the pre-inheritance. You've already inherited those things, right? We're walking around with those mindsets and beliefs before. In this example, our parents pass away, but we're faced with, if we haven't done the work before to kind of figure out those things, we're faced with having to sort that out while we're dealing with the money, right? And moving forward. Yeah. So tell us more about that, that 8-session process. So it's a bit of a discovery up front and figuring out who we are, what's going to serve us. And then where do you go from there?
And where we go from there is we actually work with a challenge that might come out of those first couple of sessions, the thing that's hard to let go of. And we do a coaching session around that to find some openness, some flexibility, and really help to shift that into something more productive and positive for the person.
What might that look like? Do you have an example? What challenges do they face? What do they need to let go?
Yes. Well, what challenges do people face? It could be allowing themselves to feel wealthy, allowing themselves to enjoy the wealth. It could be having conversations with family members. That feels challenging, asking questions if they feel like they don't know enough and they feel intimidated to do that. Or, there's just so many challenges that could come up with that. And it's really personal to each person.
Yeah. It's interesting. And we talked about this a little bit prior to our conversation today, but I coincidentally had 2 women who lost their fathers last year, and I worked with them through that process. And one in particular was kind of interesting. There was some family dynamics
Hmm.
at play,
Hmm.
and some questions about who got what.
Hmm.
And it was interesting to kind of watch her experience that and really struggle to kind of find some voice. She was almost asking for permission to question and step up for herself at the table, right? And that's interesting again to just kind of watch people go through that experience and face those challenges. It's a really daunting task.
I totally agree. And I think that's really insightful. And when people are having an experience like that, a big change, or they're inheriting, we say money magnifies. So if there are patterns, it's hard to speak up in general. And then when something like this happens, it's so much more magnified that it can be
Mm,
even harder, yet it can be also really necessary to do
yeah,
that. So it's really important to grow in those moments.
right, right. Yeah. And in our biggest challenging moments, there's usually the most opportunity for growth,
Yeah.
right? Even though it feels like you're facing an insurmountable task, right? Those challenges are an opportunity for us to grow as human beings and people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
So, what else? Take us through that, because I think this is all really useful to understand your process, and because I think a lot of people will benefit and have a similar path. What else do you kind of help people with through those sessions?
Well, the session itself that I'm talking about that can be so transformative and overcoming blocks is all a session all about working with perspective. So it's just a coaching exercise that leads people through, all right, here's how I'm currently viewing the situation, and here's how it feels, and here's where it's taking me. Like, I just can't speak up. I'm afraid. What if I get in trouble? What if I look stupid, or whatever it is? That's not helping them get to the final outcome of, being able to have the conversation with the people so that they can move forward with the state settlement or whatever it is.
Hmm.
So the process is looking like, okay, well, what if, what is an opportunity for you to grow in this situation? Which of your strengths could be, grown in this situation? Which one of your values could be amplified as you go
Hmm.
through this? And if you were to amplify that value, what does it look like if you're coming at it from that perspective? So we just look at a bunch of different perspectives, and it's so simple.
Hmm.
And then through that process, people realize, oh, there are other ways to see this.
Hmm.
And then what's so important about that is you can just choose, okay, I'm going to choose this perspective. And then you've got that tool in your back pocket
Right.
from there on for the rest of your life. Okay, here's another way I can look at it when you catch yourself in the old patterns, which we do for a really long time
Right.
until we change.
Yeah. One of the women that I mentioned, she felt under a tremendous amount of pressure. So even though she received an inheritance, and it was really a gift that her father left her that gave her some financial independence and a path forward, she had really tough time taking that perspective, because the idea that she received was like, I don't want to mess this up.
Right.
And her father was almost her de facto financial advisor for a lot of years. He was her resource. And even though he set himself up financially and did the planning work to make sure that her and her brother received this inheritance, and it was truly a gift,
Mhm.
again, that provided her that financial independence, she just had a really tough time getting through that perspective switch,
Right.
that it was a gift and it wasn't a burden, but she really felt like a burden.
Mhm.
And it sounds like that's what you're describing here, is kind of switching that perspective.
Exactly. And it often does feel like a burden, and it often is a burden. And, it's really understandable in a situation like what you're describing, that if she's never done the things before, managed the investments, or been in charge, or knows what that inheritance means to her, of course it's going to feel like a burden. And I'm sure you did a really great job of helping her see the big picture and understand it, so that over time
Mhm.
it feels less so. And over time you start to integrate it as you take more responsibility for it.
Right. Right. So, what would be next in terms of changing mindset, changing perspective, thinking about those values that you want to focus on and move forward with? Where do you take folks from there?
We take them into a visioning exercise. So the next couple of sessions are all about them defining what integrated authority from those stages, What does that look like for them personally? Because it's going to look different for everybody. What are the values that they want to honor? What are the perspectives that they want to embrace as so they can step into that fully and keep choosing that over and over? And how does that trickle down and translate to what they're focusing on? What are they prioritizing? What are they letting go of specifically? And what are new actions, habits, and beliefs that they're going to replace those with?
Right. Right. How do you talk to people about values? Because it's such an important topic. But it can feel like as I ask somebody to describe what their current values or beliefs are, it sounds like an unfair question. It's just this big, ambiguous term, right? How do you help people like really narrow down that idea of what my personal values are? What's important to me?
Right. Well, it's a super fun activity. And what happens is through the first couple of discussions that we have uncovering their habits and beliefs, what we do is we look back to that and say, okay, well, I'm hearing that this is really important to you. And all of a sudden, instead of being asked, okay, what are my values? I don't know. You look back and say, well, here's who I am. And here's what is naturally coming up as important to me. So we just kind of say, circle them like, okay, this is it. This is a value. And then we might take it a little bit further to say, okay, what's a value? Like generosity is an important value of yours. Okay, what does that mean to you? And we might clarify it with a few extra words on what generosity means to that person. And I like to stick with 5 values, and I call them value strings, like what I'm talking about. Like, okay, here's generosity. What does that mean to you? Here's confidence. How does that look for you? And then we start to just hone in on those top 5 values to implement into their new actions.
That's great. That's great. And what's interesting, and I maybe just want to highlight, you're talking about a coaching process essentially that spans 8 sessions. And we're talking about inheritance, but you haven't talked about money yet, right? I mean, there's a lot of work that goes into, preparing yourself to make financial decisions, it sounds like.
So that's exactly right. And we do talk about money in that, in the first part, we do that money archetype assessment. So that kind of brings up the conversation about money, but not from a dollars and cents perspective. But it may, money does come up in that conversation.
Right. But it's more when you're getting at beliefs and mindsets around money, maybe how you grew up, how was your family wealthy at that point or not, how you experienced money, but not the practical. We're not making decisions about how to invest or asset allocation up front.
Totally. Yep.
Right.
So that's exactly right. So they're defining them at their best with money before they start making those decisions so that they can feel really empowered and ask the questions they want to ask and align their decisions about everything with what they truly want.
Right. Right. So you've helped people get to this point where they've defined what their own values are, right? And starting to create these action steps on how they want to implement and kind of live their life moving forward. Do you feel like when you get to that point, you've built a lot of momentum and it becomes almost easier to start to develop the plans once you've done that work up front?
Yeah, that's very insightful. And there is, because at that point, people feel more empowered and they feel more excited about the possibilities and opportunities. So there is more momentum because there's genuine excitement and confidence that builds.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Do you want to share any more about the coaching process? Is there anything else you'd want to spotlight at that point moving forward?
Well, I guess there is one more thing that I would spotlight is when we shift into the last part, it's all about creating the financial roadmap. And that's where we kind of like the rubber meets the road kind of thing. Here's the financial pie picture, all the different areas, where are you now? Where would you like to be? And what would help get you there? And then we really create an action plan from there. And again, it's coming from them. Like they'll know it's not me telling them what they need to do next. I'm here as a guide if they want ideas or suggestions or something, but It really is coming from their place of knowing. So that's really powerful also in helping people move forward.
And that's kind of an aspect of coaching that I really come to really appreciate is that it's more about being a guide, right? You don't strike me as the expert investment advisor that's looking at a pile of wealth and telling people what to do,
Right.
right? You're kind of taking them on a journey of exploration and guiding them to where they want to go,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome.
Well, the last thing I'll mention about the program, because I think it's really important, is anytime we start to show up differently in our world, in our financial life, let's say we're starting to ask the questions and people are like, who are you? There's all sorts of change that happens because we're part of all these systems. And one thing that I do with clients is we do a self-compassion exercise, because if you're all excited about this change and you go to make the change and you have an experience that feels difficult or hard, it's so much harder to keep moving forward if you don't have self-compassion and say, okay, I'm trying things out. This is why I did this. We'll work through this. Let's keep moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a really important part of this transition that inheritors are in at that time.
Right. Can I ask a specific question about worthiness? Or one of the things that has kind of popped up when I've had these experiences with the clients is like, and you touched on this, but I wanted to call it out specifically. It's almost like they don't feel like they deserve it, right? They're not worthy of this. They didn't earn it. You talked about that a little bit, I think, earlier. Can we explore that a little bit? How do you help people with that mindset change specifically? What would you say to those folks throughout your sessions if they're kind of coming back to this mindset, like they just can't accept it because they don't feel like they deserve it?
That's a tough one. And that's a really good observation. And I think it does come back to what I was just talking about in terms of self-compassion, or we could say self-love. Like, I am just worthy because I exist. I am worthy of this abundance. I'm worthy of feeling the abundance. And that's actually one of the hardest things for humans to do, is to actually develop that level of self-love and compassion. So I think it's a journey. And I think that the coaching process, helping them get excited and empowered, along with the financial education process, there's sort of a transformation that happens with all of that. So I don't think it's unfortunately, like, here's how you do it. I think it's just being in the learning and the growing and just integrating with it from an authentic place.
Right.
And one day you go, all right, here I am.
Just being open to the growth, right? Facing the challenge, being open to the growth. Yeah. That's cool. So you shared some mistakes that people make when they inherit and things to possibly avoid. And I thought it was a great list. Would you mind going through that together and just maybe, sharing some examples or just highlighting for things for people to think about if they find themselves in this situation?
Yeah.
So the first one, number one, don't sign documents you don't understand.
Right.
Tell us more about that.
Right. Well, a lot of times when you have advisors for the family and, a transition happens, whether it's the death of a loved one or a trust coming due or something, you may be called into the office. We've seen this happen where people say, sign here. And they may be signing their assets into another trust that has limited control, who knows what. But part of that learning and growing is to say, I hear I need to sign this. When's the deadline? I'm going to need a week to review this. So making sure that you read and understand every single document so you know what you're signing up for. Right.
And again, within the context of what we're talking about in those stages, which sound a lot like stages of grief, right? You've just lost somebody. I think it's easy to get not pressured, because I don't want to suggest that other advisors are pressuring people to sign documents. But the lack of understanding, that innocent stage where we don't know what's happening and we've just lost somebody, it's great advice not to just go signing things that you don't understand. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
And if you don't understand what you're signing, find a trusted advisor or fiduciary who's on your team who can help you interpret the document.
Yeah. we'll skip number 2 and go to 3 because you just brought it up. But number 3 is not working with a fiduciary. Can you tell us a little bit more about that one?
Well, uh, I'm a believer in a fiduciary financial advisor because fiduciary financial advisors are required by law to do what's in the client's best interest. And I don't know why you'd want to work with anyone else. And I know from working with other people who've inherited, they have all sorts of people pitching to them
Mm,
when they haven't understood the big picture yet.
right.
And that's confusing and intimidating. And so that's why I would recommend working with a fiduciary.
Yeah, yeah. It's always one of those things that feels like it should go without saying, but it's
Mhm.
just not the case in the industry. There's different standards of care that apply to different advisors depending on where they are and who they work for.
Mhm.
So it's definitely worth calling out, especially in these situations.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um,
And just asking, and then, are you a fiduciary? And you could ask to read the advisor's ADV disclosure document to find out how they're getting paid and
mhm,
whether they're a fiduciary.
right, right. Number 2 mistake to avoid: making permanent decisions too soon.
hmm So, and I'm pretty sure we talked about this too. When a big event happens, there is this um, we call it the cauldron of chaos in the adaptive change model, right? There's this period of time where everything you knew no longer is, and you don't quite know what the new normal looks like yet. And you're processing grief or emotions or whatever is happening for you. And so give yourself a decision free period of time, 6 months or a year, where
Mhm,
maybe you're working with someone who can prioritize what actually absolutely has to be done, and you just get that done, and then you give yourself time
mhm.
to heal.
Right, right. So there are certainly things that need to get done, right? If you're settling in a state, if that responsibility is falling in your lap, there are certain things that you have to tackle,
Mhm.
right? But making decisions about how you want to invest and what that's going to look like, there's no urgency
Right.
to get a lot of that other stuff done.
Exactly.
If you're in an inheritance situation, yeah,
Right.
it's great advice. Similar, number 4 is being paralyzed for fear of making a mistake.
Mhm.
So this is kind of the opposite. It's like not taking action. Um,
Exactly. Right.
yeah, yeah. Tell us more about that.
So after the decision free zone, it's easy to stay in the innocence or denial if you're afraid because you've never made these kinds of decisions before or been in this world before. So it can be paralyzing to be there. So at some point in time, it's really important to take baby steps to move forward because that's part of your growth in learning how to manage this wealth.
Right, right. And again, I keep thinking about the clients that I work with who are not inheritors, who are just overwhelmed or lack understanding and have trouble taking action because of fear, just in normal
Mhm.
circumstances. And again, if we're framing this within the context that they've lost a loved one, and like you said, what was is not anymore. They're living in a different world. It can make that more challenging for those folks to start to take some action
Mhm.
and move forward.
Mhm.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Um, Not understanding the big picture. What
Mhm.
do you mean by that?
Well, it's impossible, as you know, to make a decision if you don't understand what your parameters are and how
Mhm.
it works. So, what does the $1 million inheritance mean to you? Does that mean you never have to work again? Does it mean you can buy a yacht and travel around the world? What does that mean? Does it mean that you don't need to continue contributing to your 401k? Who knows? But really understanding what the big pictures are, what the rules are, how it works, and what that means for you in your life is so important in order to make decisions.
Right, right. And that kind of ties into not making big decisions too soon until you have that understanding.
Mhm.
And just to highlight for folks, if you work with people in this coaching model over 8 sessions, if we're hoping that people don't make big decisions for, a cooling off period or a settling period of 6 months, a year, we're really talking about a long timeline, right? To
Mhm.
gain the understanding, to get to the point. So I wanted to click in on that and just make the point again, if people aren't picking that up, take your time, right?
Mhm.
Gaining an understanding, defining what your own values are and where you want to be moving forward is so important before you start,
Mhm.
pressing buttons and making decisions for yourself moving forward. So critical.
I wholeheartedly agree. It is a process. Be
Yeah.
patient.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. Um, Not working with somebody who understands the complexities and emotional impact of inherited wealth.
Right. That goes back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of inheritors having different reception in the world by different people. So having advisors and people in their life who can understand what they're going through and what the situation is can help them relax and have a safe space to just process what is happening.
Hmm.
A lot of times, even therapists aren't tuned into inherited wealth or
Hmm.
money in and of itself. So finding advisors who can have an understanding of that and create a safe space for people to just talk
Yeah. Yeah.
can make the process a lot more pleasant.
Right. Right. And again, there's all the complexities of settling an estate, making decisions about your own financial plans moving forward. There's a lot of technical decisions that you have to make. But when you layer emotion onto anything, it makes it even more challenging, right?
Mhm.
So working with somebody that understands the interplay of both those things, it can be a huge value add if you're in that situation. Makes total sense. And then the last one, staying with inherited family teams of advisors.
Mhm. So a lot of times we've seen this a lot where there are a team of advisors that have been working with a family for generations, and that's great. And when people are in the learning and growing phase and the integrated authority phase, it's important to just ask, who are these people working for? Do they have my back? Do I need someone who is looking out for me in the situation? And do I feel comfortable asking them questions? Do I click with them? So it's just if you interview them along with a few other advisors,
Hmm.
people have the opportunity to choose who they're going to work with. It's not inherited. Also, it can be
Right.
if you
Right.
want it to be, but just know that you have choice and you can interview different people and go with the person who feels like you feel a connection with.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I like the way that you described that. Similarly to inheriting the wealth or inheriting the mindsets and beliefs, I feel like a lot of people feel like they're going to inherit their family's advisor.
Mhm.
That's just the way it's going to go.
Right.
And there could be a lot of reasons for that.
Mhm.
But just like you don't have to make any decisions if you don't have an understanding, you can decide who you want to work with and in what capacity, and make those decisions if you pause and look around, right? Talk to some other people. You don't have to stay in that situation. Um, do you find that it's easier for folks to kind of sort out their own values, mindsets, beliefs, kind of go through this process if they get a fresh start with a new advisor? I don't know if that's a really well articulated question.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. And I think there is a benefit to having a fresh start and a fresh pair of eyes. And
Mhm.
sometimes it doesn't have to mean letting go of the other advisors too, because there's a lot of how's the expression? Are you happy because you're comfortable or comfortable because you're happy? Right. So
Right.
um, so it could be that they have someone on that they're working with personally who collaborates with the family advisors.
Hmm.
So it's not necessarily an either or,
Right.
but I do think it's important, especially when something has been going on for generations. I think it's great to have a fresh set of eyes.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially, it feels like the world is kind of changing. The idea of incorporating coaching into a financial planning process is,
Mhm,
in my opinion, kind of new, right? It's
mhm,
been around, but it's becoming more and more popular. So if your folks have been with an advisory team for many, many years and it's kind of the, straightforward asset management, wealth management model, they might not have the exposure that somebody like you
mhm,
has to some of these other modalities and frameworks and ways to really help people where they need it.
mhm.
So I always think now more than ever, it's really useful to look around and try to find somebody that aligns, and has the expertise that can help you where you are, right? and that might not be in the existing relationship that your parents had or whoever you receive these funds from.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that can even perpetuate some of the denial or innocence phase. If you're like, I'm not resonating with this person and this is it. I don't know what to do.
Mhm.
But I think that my takeaway from this conversation so far is take a deep breath. You have time and you have choice.
Mm. Yeah, I would agree. Definitely take your time. You definitely have a voice. The other thing that's coming up for me, I can't help but feel like people would benefit from this work prior to somebody passing away. Do you do any pre-inheritance work? I don't know if that's the right description, um, but it feels like, starting to think about these things, if your parents are getting older, if there's wealth in the family, if you're going to receive inheritance, that you could benefit from starting this process maybe a little bit sooner.
Absolutely. And occasionally we have had people come here wanting to prepare themselves for something they knew would be coming down the line in the next few years.
Mhm.
That is ideal. That
Right.
would be ideal.
Right. Because I feel like this is tough stuff for a lot of people to explore, right? Personal growth, self-compassion, like doing this work, it can be challenging for people to kind of warm up to or find motivation
Yeah.
to get into. But I just can't help but feel like, trying to do those things while dealing with the actual grief of losing a loved one, the better prepared we can be with some of these things and have some idea of who we are and where we want to be in the future would benefit us from kind of getting on this early.
That would be amazing. And you and I know what is involved with an estate settlement. It is so much work.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we both can see how if you were to do this sooner, you've already laid the groundwork for the emotions and maybe even done some planning around all the administrative things so that when a change does happen, it just feels more fluid. It feels just a little less heavy.
It's really, and I was having this conversation with my wife. We were both thinking about our parents who are getting older, and we were thinking about it from the estate settlement standpoint. Where are the documents? What's in place? Are the beneficiaries updated? Who's going to need to do what? What are our parents' wishes? All that stuff that comes with the administration of an estate it's a big project in and of itself, right?
And then enormous. Yeah.
Right. So if you're the trustee of an estate, in addition to being an inheritor, it's a lot to ask to then layer on top of that self-exploration, right? To set yourself up the way that you need to be. And not that it's not beneficial if it's all happening at once, but to be better prepared. And that's why I love these conversations. It's just hopefully people listening, if they might find themselves in that situation where they're going to come into money, you can start thinking about these things now, right? You don't have to wait till somebody passes away to either prepare yourself for that technical administration side, or maybe most importantly, start to think about who you are as a person. How are things going to change for you, and where do you want to be moving forward? So I love these conversations. Is there anything?
One thing on that is one thing I've recognized for people who do want to plan ahead in that arena, every family is so different. And some parents are really approachable when you ask about, hey, I just want to make sure you're taken care of and I want to understand what's expected of me. Can we have a conversation? Some parents are really receptive to that. And in a lot of families, especially with inherited wealth, there's a lot of secrecy.
Yeah, you bring up an awesome point, and I'm so glad we arrived at this. I'm here saying let's prepare for it, right? Which would involve maybe getting some information from the people who are due to pass away, but that's a difficult conversation for them to have, right? In a lot of cases. Yeah.
Right.
Do you have any ideas on how to make that conversation happen, or to maybe open up a discussion between generations?
So I would say, first, going through a program like Way into Wealth and really understanding your own situation, because then you have some base knowledge and confidence so that when you approach it with your parents, you can just come from that place of confidence.
Hmm.
And and again, every family is so different. And if it's a family that's not going to be receptive, maybe that's a whole different ballgame. But I think, just like I said, just saying, look, mom and dad, we want to make sure that you're taken care of and in good hands. And I'd love to know what you're wanting. And I'd love to know what's expected of me. And so that we can make sure we're doing everything to support you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great advice. And it's interesting too, if you are in a situation where maybe parents aren't receptive to that conversation, maybe pausing there and how do you feel about that? Right?
Hmm.
That's a meaningful observation,
Hmm.
right? If you're in a family where it's money's not talked about and it's secretive and they won't engage, well, what does that mean for me?
Hmm.
Right. And maybe that's an interesting point of your own self-discovery,
Hmm.
to think about at that point. Because I'm willing to bet that if you're in that situation, that's meaningful information.
Hmm. Yep.
Yeah. Anything else about your process? Any words of wisdom or advice for inheritors to think about before we start wrapping up our conversation?
I guess one thing that just came to mind hearing you ask that question is understand that as an inheritor of significant wealth, your path is likely going to look very different than people around you.
Hmm.
And it can feel isolating. And that's kind of goes with the territory in a lot of ways. So I just wanted to normalize that because it can feel so isolating to be an
Yeah.
inheritor. So find your people, your friends, your family, your advisor, or whoever you can create community with around that.
Right. Yeah, I think that's such great advice. And I'm working with a client right now who, hopefully doesn't inherit for a while. Her parents are alive and healthy, but she has a tough time talking to them about money. And she hired a financial advisor to kind of figure some of these things out. So I think it's such great advice to find your tribe, find your helpers,
Hmm.
to use the Mr. Rogers
Yep.
term, find people that can help you out. And you're such a great example of that. And being willing to kind of share your expertise in this way, I think is useful. So again, we appreciate it. A couple last questions before I let you go. Are there any books that come to mind, podcasts that you listen to, other people's work in this space that might be adjacent to what you do that you might want to spotlight for us?
Yeah, good question. So one book that I love I have a lot of clients who have young children and want to teach their kids about money. And the book that I recommend is called Financially Fit Kids.
Hmm.
Do you know it?
Yeah.
By Jolene Godfrey.
Yeah. I don't know if it's been recommended, but I'm aware of it.
Yeah. It's a great book because it goes
Yeah.
through each developmental phase of a child's life. And then it's like you open this thing and it has this chart of all the primary financial skills and different age appropriate activities you can do with them. So that's a
Mhm.
pretty good way to do that.
I found too that reading books like that are enlightening for myself, right? I
Mm.
learn things, when you're thinking about teaching others, it's like, wow, what do I really know or think about this particular topic? And I feel like that was a takeaway when I read that one. Yeah.
Yeah. So what other books would I recommend? I'm looking at my bookshelf right now.
I always put everybody on the spot and they do the same thing to look at their uh, at their bookshelf.
um, I feel like it's so dependent
Yeah.
on what someone's going through personally.
Yeah. At the risk of putting you on the spot again, one of the questions I like to ask everyone that comes on the show, this is a show about financial well-being, to use kind of a big high term. When you think about self-care, well-being, you mentioned that being a part of your process. Are there any go-to habits or routines or things that you get back to that kind of help you with that self-care process or just feeling good in general, improving your own well-being overall?
Yes, I'm sort of a well-being nut.
Yeah.
And
So that's why I was curious.
and in fact, while I was getting, and this may be a book people are interested in if they're interested in well-being, but when I was getting my coaching certification, I was a well-being coach in a program called Life XT, the Lifelong Habit of Well-Being. And in that program, they're taking modern neuroscience with ancient wisdom traditions. So the neuroscience showing how when we practice compassion, gratitude, meditation, etc., it actually changes our brain and it changes our habits and it changes our life. So I would say there's like, and I live in Boulder, Colorado, so there are well-being options all over the place. I would say go with something that resonates with you and that feels nourishing. You know, for me, it's like hot bath, meditation, journaling, and exercise, eating healthy food. I mean, I feel like those are my everyday basic things just to stay feeling good that I do.
That's great. It's awesome. I appreciate you sharing. Where should people check you out? Websites, social media accounts, where do you want people to go to check out your work and the Wealth Conservancy?
Well, we have, the Wealth Conservancy's website is thewealthconservancy.com. And the Way Into Wealth website is wayintowealth.com. And now there's .orgs. So it's, wayintowealth.com. And there's also, I'm on LinkedIn, Melissa Hoyer.
Cool.
So those are the places to find me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I think this is such an important topic. And I think the way that you and your firm go about helping people who find themselves in the situation of inheriting wealth is just invaluable. Because I think it's again, like we talked about, it's a tough situation when you lose somebody. Money in and of itself can be a difficult subject for a lot of folks to navigate. And when you combine the two, it's just a ripe situation for a lot of trouble. So we appreciate your time. We appreciate your expertise. Encourage everybody. We'll link to the websites and the socials and everything in the show notes. So definitely reach out to Melissa. And thank you again for your time. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. And thank you for bringing this topic up. I think it's really important. And I appreciate that.
Yeah, likewise. I couldn't agree more. Thanks for listening, everybody. Don't forget to go to modernfinancialwellness.com where you'll see this episode posted with all the links to Melissa and her company. We'll link to the book that she recommended. You can check out the resource page of the website and find all the other recommendations for our guests and a lot of other information. And thanks for listening. We'll see you next time. Thanks again for listening to this episode. A quick note, although I do hope that the information that we talked about was helpful, in no way is anything discussed on the podcast to be taken as specific financial advice. Please consult your own advisors and do your own research when you're making important financial decisions.